Welcome, everyone, to this special conversation where we'll be discussing the recently concluded Third Belt and Road Forum in China. I'm Farwa Aamer, the Director for South Asia Initiatives at the Asia Society Policy Institute. And today I'm joined by my colleague, Blake Berger, and we're excited to dive deep into the forum, its impacts, and its significance. But Blake, before that, would you like to introduce yourself?
Certainly. I'm Blake Berger. I'm the Associate Director here at the Asia Society Policy Institute, and I've been closely following the developments and implications of the Belt and Road Initiative for the past 10 years. It's great to be here to discuss the state of the initiative and all the hubbub surrounding the forum.
Let's just jump right into it, beginning with a quick overview of the Belt and Road Initiative, shall we? Blake, do you want to get us started on that?
My pleasure. So October marked the 10th anniversary of the Belt and Road Initiative, initially launched in both Kazakhstan and Indonesia in 2013 with the Silk Road Economic Belt and the Maritime Silk Road, respectively. The last 10 years has witnessed roughly 140 countries sign on to the BRI. Broadly, the Belt and Road has been about infrastructure financing and development, and also enhancing connectivity and linkages between China and partner countries throughout the world. The developing world has had a tremendous infrastructure financing gap, and Beijing has sought to utilize the initiative to help fill it. That being said, I'd be hard-pressed not to mention some of the domestic factors that also led Beijing to advance the Belt and Road Initiative, including supporting Chinese state-owned industries and private companies to go out, so to speak, and also help address the issue of excess capacity in, for example, sectors such as cement and steel. A decade in, now there are over 2,000 Belt and Road projects under its umbrella, stretching from Africa to Southeast Asia, and it has also expanded into sectors including digital infrastructure, healthcare, space, and now artificial intelligence.
Yeah, pretty impressive, right? But also one of the most important regions for the Belt and Road Initiative is South Asia. China's extensive involvement in South Asia through the BRI is rather noteworthy, even as persistent criticism suggests that the BRI is a part of China's strategic endeavor to gain geopolitical influence by exerting economic pressures on smaller South Asian nations. Of course, the controversial lease of Hambantota Port is frequently cited as an example of this, and India, the big South Asian player, isn't a proponent of the initiative. But within South Asia, the flagship project of the BRI rests, which is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC, a substantial 15-year, $62 billion investment in Pakistan, which was initiated in 2015. This endeavor of CPEC itself marked a shift from a long strategic alliance between China and Pakistan into the realm of a more cooperative equation in terms of economic advancement between these two countries. However, the CPEC itself has faced criticisms over the years due to concerns over project transparencies, impacts on local industry, security challenges, and the slower than expected progress of various initiatives. But now that we have the overview and the groundwork, moving to the forum itself, I noticed this, and I'm sure you did too, a week prior to the forum in China's first ever white paper on BRI, Beijing had shared that it signed more than 200 BRI cooperation agreements with more than 150 countries and about 30 international organizations across the globe. So the momentum was being built in the days leading. And then come the day itself, and we see that high-level attendance at this year's forum was down compared to the first two. But there was still representation from the global south, which to China is somewhat a win, given its ambitions to be a big leading player within the global south region. In President Xi's speech alone, of course, a sense of commitment to a bigger and better BRI was clear. He emphasized cooperation that involves planning, building, and benefiting together. He stressed on the importance of then open, green, and clean cooperation and the goal of high standard, people-centered, and sustainable collaboration. I guess the forum's overall focus on greening the BRI works, since BRI has faced significant criticism in the past for supporting development of overseas fossil fuel infrastructure, particularly coal-fired power stations. And then, of course, beyond the speech, the new 8-point plan mentions the continuation of the Green Innovation Conference, establishing a dialogue platform for solar industry and expert networks in green development. China, of course, also shared that it will implement green investment principles and offer around 100,000 training opportunities to partner countries by 2030. But besides that, probably what stood out most, which was not very surprising, was the messaging on unilateral sanctions, economic coercion, and supply chain disruptions. Through President Xi's speech, China in subtle ways cautioned the West against viewing other countries, or in this case, China's development, as a threat. What were some of the major highlights for you, Blake?
Thanks, Farwa. I mean, first, I think most importantly is that the Belt and Road isn't going anywhere and is here to stay. Prior to the forum, there was really a little confusion over the future trajectory of the initiative, especially when placed alongside the Global Development Initiative, or GDI, especially since it was launched in 2021. The last year and a half or so, the narrative around the Belt and Road had been small is beautiful. And there was some concern that it would be potentially subsumed under the GDI label. That being said, this forum cleared that right up. The Belt and Road will continue to proceed, albeit with more of an emphasis on due diligence, more attention to risk. It was also announced that the forum, the Belt and Road Forum, will now have a permanent secretariat. And the Belt and Road will even have access to even more capital. And in terms of the GDI, what we saw is that the GDI will really be kind of more focused on the kind of implementing mechanism for the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And the second main takeaway for me has been this focus on addressing integrity within the initiative. And this has been a key interest of mine. To say the least, there have been a range of issues plaguing Belt and Road projects, and often enough, a lot of them kind of do stem from the lack of pre-project preparation and planning and due diligence in the very early stages of projects. And the announcement of both the high-level principles on the Belt and Road integrity building and integrity and compliance evaluation system are kind of steps in the right direction. That being said, the documents have yet to be released, but it does signal that China is taking these issues seriously, but we'll really have to wait for the details once they are released. And turning to regions, Farwa, could you kind of maybe talk a little bit about your major takeaways on the Belt and Road Forum and South Asia?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that. From South Asia, the two key attendees were Pakistan and Sri Lanka. Pakistan, of course, has this all-weather friendship with China. So the country being represented by caretaker Prime Minister Anwarul Haq Kakar was all praises. China and Pakistan signed a much-delayed key deal to construct a multi-billion-dollar railway project in Pakistan just during the BRI Forum, and there were other key MOUs that were signed. Also, on the sidelines, when President Xi and Prime Minister Kakar met, President Xi reportedly proposed the advancement of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor as an upgraded version of its previous self, which would involve increased collaboration in areas like industrial parks, agriculture, mining, and new energy. Though all of this is contingent on the assurance of required security measures by Pakistan, which was the reason why China had pushed back on some of the expansion within CPEC just a couple of weeks before the forum itself and the news had come out. But other major development was Taliban's attendance. It attended the forum, which was their highest profile multilateral meeting since the Taliban government took over Afghanistan in 2021. I know we both did a little, will they, won't they attend, but they did. And this was much in line with the extension of CPEC, which was announced earlier this year to include Afghanistan. And China has obvious strategic and economic interests in the country and had a new envoy come into Afghanistan as well. So that all kind of tracks in terms of China's strategy with BRI and overall within the region. For Sri Lanka, President Ranil Wickremesinghe, who is representing the country, assured China of his country's continued active participation in the BRI. There were more cooperative MOUs signed here as well, but what stood out was the mention of China's support for its financial institutions in terms of engaging with Sri Lanka to promptly resolve any debt-related matters, which is, of course, a key concern for this South Asian country, for Sri Lanka. We must also acknowledge, not really drifting away from the BRI, but it must be brought up, is the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor, which was announced during the G20 Leaders Summit in New Delhi in September, which is being considered is being considered as a new connectivity corridor, an alternative to the BRI potentially, and of course, if it goes through, a big South Asian player will be front and center of this new connectivity corridor. So there'll be new dynamics developing and within South Asia, and one where China will be focused on and watching very carefully. But Southeast Asia is equally very important to BRI and to China. So I would love to hear from you, what were the major developments from the forum coming out for Southeast Asian countries?
Sure, thanks, Farwa. I mean, really a big takeaway for me was who showed up and who didn't. Quite surprising, neither the Singaporeans, the Filipinos, anyone from Myanmar or Malaysia attended this year's forum. And so while the Philippines not sending anyone isn't entirely a shock, especially with tensions in the South China Sea ramping up at the moment, I am surprised that no one from Myanmar or Malaysia attended. It also should be noted that this is the first time that no one from the International Monetary Fund attended the forum. They had done so for the previous two. But that being said, the director of the New Development Bank did. So it is kind of a step showing the more attuned focus on the global South. Turning to Farwa, on the Belt and Roads Forum's credibility, I wanted just to turn to you to get your insights on this.
I was thinking about what this forum offers beyond its economic means and economic dialogue. Has it become an international forum for discussion on global affairs too? The UN Secretary General was prominently present, so was the Russian leadership. Of course, Putin was there, and tons of exchanges on the sidelines on the ongoing Middle East crises, and there were statements that were put out that all suggested those and conveyed some sort of messaging on each of these countries' stance or joint stance on what is happening in the Middle East. And that made me think whether the BRI Forum is finding its way to become one of those platforms where world leaders would convene and also discuss what's happening on the global arenas and on the global stage. So what are your thoughts on that? Do we see that this will become a recurring thing?
I think this year's forum deviated from the norm. With conflicts ongoing in both Ukraine and also in Israel and Palestine, I don't really envision the Belt and Road Forum becoming a destination, so to speak, for geopolitical conversation. I envision whenever we do see the next rendition of this forum that it's going to be more focused on international development and cooperation. So I really don't see the forum kind of shifting its modus operandi to be kind of a destination for geopolitical conversation.
But need and time based, we might see some of these conversations come up if China is convening them. But the future looks uncertain in many ways for the entire world. But like you said, BRI is surely not going anywhere. It may not have the same hype as it did in its initial run, and more challenges may emerge given the evolving geopolitical and economic space we find ourselves in today. But and of course, Chinese banks have realized now that development and financing in the developing world is not very easy. So there might be pushbacks and slower progresses on some of these initiatives. But as far as I think in China's own words, as far as the dedication commitment is there, and the President Xi is there as the chief operator of this, the BRI will live on, and we might see bigger and better things coming out of it. What's your final take on this?
Yeah, as you said, the Belt and Road isn't going anywhere. I envision that the Belt and Road is going to be sleeker, smarter, cleaner, and greener. now. That being said, I don't envision this process taking place without bumps in the road or without loopholes being built into it. But if the last 10 years has really shown us anything, is that the BRI will continue to evolve, will take on new roads and new corridors, and try to seek to address the systemic issues that confronted it in its first decade. So, I see the Belt and Road just continuing to move forward and continuing to learn from its past mistakes. So really, thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Farwa, and it's been a pleasure.